The needle slipped from Lydia Devereaux's trembling fingers and clattered onto the marble floor, the sound echoing through the cavernous chamber like a gunshot, and she knew in that instant that the vampire king, lying motionless in the silk-draped bed, had heard it. Her breath caught in her throat as she bent to retrieve the syringe, her pulse hammering so violently she was certain he could hear it. The medical cart beside her rattled as her hip bumped against it, and she cursed silently, forcing herself to steady her hands. She had trained for 3 months to infiltrate the vampire court's underground medical wing. 3 months of memorizing protocols, learning to forge credentials, studying the layout of the ancient fortress that existed beneath the glittering streets of Prague. 3 months to prepare for this single moment, and now she was fumbling like an amateur. The vampire king, Drakonov Ashenmoor, lay perfectly still against black satin pillows, his white hair spilling across the dark fabric like fresh snow on midnight ground. His skin was alabaster, almost luminescent in the dim candlelight that filled the room. Even in his supposedly weakened state, he was breathtaking in a way that made Lydia's chest tighten. His features were sharp and aristocratic, all elegant angles and masculine beauty that seemed carved from marble. He wore a simple black shirt that hung open at the collar, revealing the pale column of his throat. Lydia had been told he was dying, that some rare blood disease had weakened the ancient king, leaving him vulnerable for the first time in his 1,000-year existence. The human resistance had sent her here with a singular mission: get close enough to inject him with a serum that would extract information about vampire strongholds across Europe. They needed locations, numbers, weaknesses. The vampires had ruled from the shadows for centuries, and humanity was finally fighting back. She picked up the syringe with more care this time, her eyes fixed on Drakonov's face. His eyes remained closed, his chest rising and falling in the slow, measured rhythm of sleep. Or was it? Vampires didn't need to breathe the way humans did. Was this all performance? "You're being paranoid," she whispered to herself, barely audible. "He's unconscious. The guard said he hasn't woken in 3 days." Still, something prickled at the back of her neck as she approached the bed. The room smelled of old parchment and something darker, more primal. Blood, perhaps, though she saw none. Everything was pristine, orderly. Medical equipment lined one wall, strange hybrid machines that seemed part modern technology, part medieval alchemy. IV stands held bags of blood, the liquid almost black in the low light. Lydia had replaced the night nurse 2 hours ago. The real nurse, a vampire woman named Serafina, now lay unconscious in a storage closet 3 floors down, drugged but unharmed. Lydia had copied her uniform perfectly. The deep burgundy dress with its high collar and silver buttons, the white apron, the small cap pinned to her dark hair. She even wore the same perfume, a cloying rose scent that made her nauseous. She reached the bedside and stood there, syringe in hand, staring down at the vampire king. Up close, he was even more magnificent. His lashes were long and white, casting shadows on his cheekbones. His lips were pale pink, full and sensual. There was a slight furrow between his dark brows, as if even in sleep he was troubled. "I'm sorry," she murmured, surprised by the genuine regret in her voice. She didn't want to hurt him. But this was war, and he was the enemy, no matter how beautiful. She positioned the needle above his arm, searching for the vein. Did vampires even have veins in the traditional sense? Her training had covered vampire physiology, but there was so much humans still didn't understand. She pressed 2 fingers against his inner elbow, feeling for a pulse. His skin was cool to the touch, smooth as silk, and yes, there. A slow, steady throb beneath the surface. The needle touched his skin. "I wonder," a voice said, deep and resonant and absolutely awake, "how long you planned to stand there before you made your move." Lydia's heart stopped. Her eyes snapped to Drakonov's face and found his eyes open, watching her with an intensity that pinned her in place like a butterfly to a board. His eyes were the color of blood rubies, deep crimson with flecks of darker red, and they gleamed with intelligence and something that might have been amusement. She stumbled backward, the syringe falling from her nerveless fingers again. This time, it hit the carpet, rolling under the bed. Her mind raced, calculating escape routes, but the door was across the room and he was between her and it. Not that it mattered. If the stories were true, he could move faster than she could blink. She couldn't find words. Her training hadn't prepared her for this. She was supposed to have time. He was supposed to be unconscious. Drakonov sat up slowly, deliberately, like a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. The movement was fluid, graceful, and his white hair cascaded over his shoulders. He tilted his head, studying her with those unnerving eyes. "You're not Serafina," he observed, "though you've done an admirable job of mimicking her appearance. The perfume is a nice touch, but you forgot one critical detail." "What detail?" The question escaped before Lydia could stop it. A slight smile curved his lips. "Serafina has served me for 2 centuries. She would never drop a needle. Her hands don't tremble." Lydia's throat went dry. "How long have you been awake?" "The entire time." He swung his legs over the side of the bed, sitting on the edge, his bare feet touching the plush carpet. He wore black trousers, and now that he was upright, she could see how tall he was, easily over 6 feet with broad shoulders and a lean, powerful build. "I've been awake for all 3 nights you've been in my fortress, little spy. Did you think I wouldn't notice a human infiltrating my court?" Terror washed through her, cold and absolute. "Then why didn't you stop me? Why didn't the guards? Because I wanted to see what you would do." He stood, and despite her fear, Lydia found herself mesmerized by the way he moved, like water, like shadow, impossibly smooth. He walked toward her, and she backed away until her spine hit the wall. "I wanted to understand what would make a human woman risk everything to sneak into the den of monsters. I wanted to know if you would go through with it." "Go through with what?" She tried to sound defiant, but her voice shook. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel the unnatural coolness radiating from his body. He reached out slowly, giving her time to flinch away, and plucked something from her hair. A strand of Serafina's blonde hair that must have clung to the cap. He held it between his fingers, examining it with mild interest, before letting it drift to the floor. "Killing me," he said simply. "Or trying to, at least. That serum you carried, what was it meant to do? Weaken me further? Extract information? Or were you supposed to drive a stake through my heart while I slept?" Lydia lifted her chin, trying to muster courage she didn't feel. "Information. We need to know where your strongholds are, how many vampires exist. We need to fight back." "Fight back." He repeated the words as if tasting them. His hand came up and she braced for violence, but he only brushed his fingers along her jawline, a touch so gentle it made her shiver. "Tell me, Lydia Devereaux, what exactly do you think we've done to deserve this war?" Her breath caught. "How do you know my name?" "I know everything about you. I know you lost your brother 2 years ago to a vampire attack in London. I know you joined the resistance 6 months later. I know you're 23 years old. You studied nursing before the world learned vampires were real. And you volunteer at a children's hospital every Sunday." His thumb traced the curve of her lower lip, and her pulse jumped. "I know you didn't want this assignment because you're afraid of me, but you took it anyway because you're brave and foolish in equal measure." "My brother," she forced the words out, "he was murdered, drained dry and left in an alley like garbage." Something flickered in Drakonov's eyes. Regret? Anger? It was gone too quickly to identify. "And you think I ordered his death? You're the king. Everything your kind does is your responsibility." "That's convenient logic." He dropped his hand and stepped back, giving her space to breathe. "Did you know that vampire who killed your brother was executed 3 days later? That I personally removed his head because he broke our most sacred law: we do not feed carelessly, and we never kill without cause. Your brother was an innocent. His death was murder, and I treated it as such." Lydia stared at him, her mind reeling. "That's a lie," the resistance said. "The resistance knows only what it wants to believe." Drakonov walked to a cabinet against the wall and pulled out a crystal decanter filled with dark liquid. Wine, she hoped, though with vampires, one could never be certain. He poured 2 glasses and held one out to her. "Drink. You look like you might collapse." "I'm not drinking anything you give me." "It's wine. French, from before the revolution. I have no need to drug you, Lydia. If I wanted to harm you, you'd already be dead." He said it matter-of-factly, without threat, and somehow that made it more terrifying. She didn't take the glass. He shrugged and set it on the bedside table, then settled into a high-backed chair near the fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows across his pale features, making him look otherworldly. He sipped his wine and studied her over the rim. So what happens now? Lydia asked. You kill me? Torture me for information about the resistance? No, the word was simple, final. Now you tell me the truth. Why are you really here? I told you. You told me the mission. I want to know why you accepted it. Because there's something in your eyes, little spy. Something beyond revenge. You looked at me just now, when you thought I was sleeping, and you said you were sorry. People who truly hate don't apologize to their enemies. Lydia's hands clenched into fists, clenched into her. She hated that he'd heard that, hated that he could read her so easily. Maybe I'm just a good person who doesn't enjoy causing pain? Then you shouldn't be a soldier. I didn't have a choice. When your kind revealed themselves 5 years ago, everything changed. Humans became prey. We had to organize to fight back, or we'd be cattle. Drakonov set down his glass with a soft click. Is that what you think we want? To make you cattle? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Humans always assume the worst. Yes, vampires drink blood. Yes, we are stronger, faster, harder to kill. But we have coexisted with humanity for millennia. We take donors willingly given. We protect the secrecy that keeps both our species safe. We don't want war. Then why the attacks? Why the deaths? There are always rogues, vampires who reject our laws, who feed recklessly. We hunt them down, but we cannot be everywhere at once. Just as humans have murderers and criminals, so do we. He leaned forward, his crimson eyes boring into hers. But your resistance doesn't want peace, they want extinction. Every vampire staked, every coven burned. They've killed my people indiscriminately, elders who've never harmed a human, children barely a century old. Tell me, Lydia, who is truly the monster? She wanted to argue, to defend the resistance, but doubt crept in like poison. She'd seen things during her training that troubled her. Prisoners treated cruelly, celebrations when vampire children were found and executed. She'd told herself it was necessary, that vampires weren't truly alive, weren't capable of feeling or loving. But looking at Drakonov now, seeing the genuine pain in his expression when he spoke of his people dying, she wasn't so certain. I don't know what to believe anymore, she whispered. He stood and crossed to her again, this time holding out his hand. Then believe what you see. Stay. Learn. I won't harm you, and I won't let anyone else harm you either. 3 days, Lydia. Give me 3 days to show you the truth, and then you can make your choice. Return to the resistance with whatever information you gather, or... He trailed off, his expression softening. Or stay. Why would I stay? Because I think you're tired of hating. I think you want answers, real ones, not propaganda, and because... He hesitated, and for the first time he looked uncertain, vulnerable. Because from the moment I sensed you in my fortress, I've been unable to think of anything else. You intrigue me, Lydia Devereaux. I want to know you. Her heart pounded. This was insane. He was the enemy, the king of the creatures who'd turned her world upside down. She should refuse, should fight, should find a way to complete her mission or die trying. But his hand was still extended, pale and elegant, and she found herself reaching out before she could stop herself. His fingers closed around hers, cool and gentle. 3 days, she agreed. The next evening for vampires did not wake during daylight hours. Lydia found herself in a situation she'd never imagined. She was given guest quarters in the fortress, a suite of rooms that would have been decadent in any era. The bedroom alone was larger than her entire apartment in Prague. The bed was massive, draped in midnight blue silk, and the furniture was all dark wood carved with intricate designs. A balcony overlooked an underground cavern that had been transformed into a garden, complete with bioluminescent plants that glowed in shades of blue and purple. A vampire servant, a young woman named Celestina with kind eyes, brought her clothing. His Majesty thought you might be more comfortable in something other than the nurse's uniform, Celestina explained. She laid out a dress on the bed, deep emerald green with silver embroidery. It was beautiful, medieval in style, but clearly well made. I can't wear that, Lydia protested. I'm not staying long enough to... His Majesty insists. Celestina's voice was firm but not unkind. You are a guest in his court, and guests are treated with honor. Besides, that uniform must be uncomfortable. It was, actually. The collar was too tight, and the fabric itched. Lydia sighed and nodded. Thank you. When Celestina left, Lydia changed quickly. The dress fit perfectly, which was unsettling. Had Drakonov guessed her measurements just from looking at her? She supposed when you'd lived for 1,000 years, you got good at that sort of thing. She was examining herself in the mirror, marveling at how different she looked, when a knock sounded at the door. "Come in," she called. Drakonov entered, and her breath caught. He wore formal attire now, all black except for a deep red vest embroidered with gold. His white hair was pulled back partially, secured with a silver clasp, revealing his elegant features. He looked every inch the king, regal and commanding, but when his eyes found her, they softened. "You look beautiful," he said simply. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. Though I feel ridiculous, this isn't me." "Who are you, then?" He approached slowly, as if afraid to spook her. "The soldier? The nurse? The woman who apologizes to her enemies?" "I don't know anymore." The admission hurt, but it was true. She'd been so certain of her purpose, her mission, and now everything felt murky. He held out his arm. "Then let me show you who my people are. Perhaps it will help you understand who you want to be." She hesitated, then slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow. His arm was solid beneath the fabric, and that strange coolness seeped through to her skin. He led her from the room into the corridor beyond. The fortress was a labyrinth of stone passages lit by torches and modern electric lights in equal measure. Tapestries hung on the walls, depicting battles and celebrations from ages past. They walked in silence for a while, and Lydia found herself hyper-aware of his presence beside her, the way he shortened his stride to match hers, the subtle scent of spice and night air that clung to him. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "The Great Hall. It's evening mealtime, and I want you to see my court as they truly are." They descended a grand staircase and emerged into a massive hall that stole Lydia's breath. The ceiling soared overhead, supported by carved pillars. Long tables filled the space, and hundreds of vampires sat together, talking and laughing. Goblets of blood sat before them, yes, but there was also food fruits, bread, cheeses. Lydia had read that vampires could consume regular food, though they gained no sustenance from it. They ate for pleasure, for the memory of their human lives. Every vampire turned to look as Drakonov entered, and the hall fell silent. Then, as one, they rose and bowed. The gesture was full of respect, even love. These weren't mindless monsters, they were people, or had been once, and they revered their king. Drakonov raised a hand, and everyone sat again, conversation resuming at a lower volume. He guided Lydia to the high table at the far end of the hall, where a throne sat beside a smaller but no less elegant chair. He seated her in the latter before taking his own seat. "You give me the queen's chair," Lydia observed. "I have no queen." It seemed appropriate for an honored guest. A vampire servant brought her a plate of food-roasted meat, vegetables, fresh bread, and a goblet of wine. Drakonov's goblet held blood, dark and viscous, and Lydia tried not to stare at it. He noticed her discomfort. "It troubles you," he said quietly. "What we drink. It's from people. How can it not trouble me? It's donated. Every vampire in this hall feeds from willing humans who are compensated generously. We take only what's needed, never enough to harm. Many donors return for years. Some have become close friends with the vampires they feed." He took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "We aren't the monsters you've been taught we are." Lydia picked at her food, her appetite gone. A young vampire approached the table, bowing nervously. He was handsome, with white blonde hair and pale blue eyes, and he looked no older than 20. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Forgive the interruption, but I wanted to thank you. My sister, you saved her last month from the hunters. We received word that she's safe in the Vienna Coven now." Drakonov's expression warmed. "I'm glad, Alexander. Tell your family they are welcome here if Vienna becomes unsafe." "Thank you, sire." Alexander bowed again, shot a curious glance at Lydia, and retreated. "Hunters?" Lydia asked. "The resistance, as you call them. They raided a coven outside Budapest, killed 30 vampires, including children. Alexander's sister was one of the few who escaped." His voice was carefully neutral, but she heard the anger beneath. She was 70 years old, barely more than a child by our standards. She'd never harmed a human. Guilt twisted in Lydia's stomach. She'd heard about the Budapest raid. The resistance had celebrated it as a major victory. No one had mentioned children. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. They don't tell their soldiers the truth. It's easier to kill when you believe your enemy is pure evil. The meal continued, and Lydia watched the vampires around her with new eyes. They laughed and argued and told stories. They grieved for their losses and celebrated their victories. They were alive in every way that mattered, and she felt the foundations of her beliefs crumbling. After dinner, Drakonov took her to the fortress library, a cavernous room filled with more books than Lydia had ever seen. Shelves stretched to the ceiling, accessible by rolling ladders. The scent of old paper and leather filled the air. "This is my favorite place," Drakonov admitted, running his fingers along a shelf of ancient tomes. "I've spent centuries collecting these. History, philosophy, literature from every culture. Knowledge is the greatest treasure." Lydia wandered the stacks, marveling. "I've never seen anything like this." "Take whatever you like. I insist my guests be comfortable, and you struck me as someone who appreciates books." She pulled a volume from the shelf, a collection of poetry in Old English. "How did you become king? Were you born to it?" Drakonov settled into a leather chair near the fireplace, gesturing for her to join him. She sat across from him, the book in her lap. He was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "I was made a vampire 1,000 years ago," he began. "A Viking warrior, dying on a battlefield in the frozen north. A vampire woman found me, saw something worth saving, and offered me a choice, death or immortality. I chose to live. For centuries, I wandered, learning what I was, what I could become. I saw kingdoms rise and fall. I watched humans build wonders and commit atrocities, and I saw my own kind do the same." "Then how did you become king?" 300 years ago, there was no king. Vampires were fractured, covens fighting each other, humans dying in the crossfire. It was chaos. I gathered the strongest elders and proposed a new way, one ruler, one law, one purpose, to coexist with humanity, not dominate them. Many resisted, but eventually, they saw the wisdom in unity. I became king not through birthright, but through the will of my people. And you've ruled ever since. I've tried to rule justly, to protect both vampires and humans, but it's harder than you might imagine. There are always those who resist, who want war, who believe might makes right." He looked at her, his crimson eyes intense. "Your resistance is a symptom of centuries of fear and misunderstanding. But if we keep fighting, both our species will suffer." Lydia's mind whirled. Everything he said made sense, but could she trust him? She'd been taught he was a liar, a manipulator, yet nothing she'd seen suggested deception. "What do you want from me?" she asked bluntly. "I want you to see the truth, and then I want you to help me end this war." "How could I possibly help?" "You have connections to the resistance. You could be a bridge, someone who helps both sides understand each other. You could prevent more deaths, Lydia, human and vampire alike." It sounded impossible, naive, but the hope in his voice made her want to believe. "They'd never listen to me. I'm just a recruit." "You're more than that. You're brave enough to infiltrate a vampire fortress. You're compassionate enough to hesitate before striking. You're intelligent enough to question what you've been told." He leaned forward. "You're exactly who we need." She wanted to protest, to tell him he was wrong, but words failed her. Instead, she asked, "Why do you care so much? You're immortal, powerful. You could weather this war and emerge victorious." "At what cost?" His voice turned fierce. "How many of my people would die? How many humans? I've lived long enough to know that war never truly ends. It only pauses. I want peace, real peace, so that future generations don't have to fear each other." Lydia felt something shift inside her, a wall crumbling. She'd hated vampires for so long, blamed them for every loss, every fear. But Drakonov wasn't a monster. He was just a man, an immortal one, yes, but a man nonetheless trying to do right by his people. And maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong about all of it. "I'll try," she whispered. "I don't know if I can help, but I'll try." Relief flooded his features, and he reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. Thank you. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined, the fire crackling beside them. Lydia felt her heart racing again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was something else, something dangerous and thrilling and completely unexpected. She was beginning to care for him, for the enemy king, for the vampire who should terrify her, but instead made her feel safer than she had in years. "Tell me about yourself," Drakonov said softly. "Not the soldier or the spy. You. What did you love before all this?" She swallowed hard. No one had asked her that in so long. "Music. I used to play piano. My mother taught me when I was a child. We'd spend hours together, just playing and singing." Her voice cracked. "She died when I was 16. Cancer. My brother and I, we were all each other had." "And then you lost him too." "Yes. After that there was only the resistance, only the mission." She looked down at their joined hands, his so pale against her warmer skin. "I forgot what it felt like to be just me. Just Lydia." He stood, still holding her hand, and pulled her gently to her feet. "Come with me." He led her through more corridors, deeper into the fortress, until they reached a set of ornate double doors. He pushed them open, and Lydia gasped. Inside was a music room, grand and beautiful. A piano sat in the center, gleaming black lacquer that reflected the candlelight. Instruments lined the walls, violins, cellos, harps. "Play," Drakonov said. "Remind yourself who you are." Lydia approached the piano as if in a dream. She sat on the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. It had been so long, she pressed down, tentative, and a single note rang out, pure and clear. Then another. And then her hands remembered, and she was playing. A piece by Chopin her mother had loved. The music filled the room, filled her heart, and she felt tears streaming down her face. Drakonov stood behind her, listening in silence. When she finished, he placed a hand on her shoulder, a comforting weight. "Beautiful," he murmured. "Thank you for sharing that with me." She turned to look up at him, and the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. He saw her, not the spy, not the enemy, but her. And she realized with startling clarity that she'd been seeing him too. Not the king, not the monster, but the man beneath. "I should go," she said, her voice unsteady. "It's late." "Of course." But he didn't move his hand and she didn't stand. They stayed like that, frozen in a moment that felt heavy with possibility, until finally he stepped back. "I'll have Celestina show you to your rooms." That night, lying in the massive bed, Lydia couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with everything she'd seen, everything she'd learned. The resistance had lied to her. Or maybe not lied, but shown her only one side of the truth. Vampires could be dangerous, yes, but so could humans. And Drakonov, he was nothing like she'd expected. He was honorable, protective, and so desperately lonely she ached for him. She thought about the way he'd listened to her play, the reverence in his expression, the way he'd held her hand like it was something precious, the way her heart had pounded, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. She was falling for him. It was insane, impossible, but undeniable, and she had no idea what to do about it. The second day began with an unexpected visitor. Lydia was in her rooms having breakfast delivered by the ever-efficient Celestina when a knock sounded. She opened the door to find a vampire man, ancient and intimidating, with white hair that fell to his waist and eyes like chips of ice. "Miss Devereaux," he said, his voice formal. "I am Lord Vasilios, advisor to His Majesty. He requests your presence in the council chamber." Lydia's stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" "That remains to be seen. Please follow me." The council chamber was smaller than the great hall, but no less impressive. A round table dominated the center, and seated around it were a dozen vampires, all ancient and powerful looking. Drakonov sat at the head, and his expression was grim. He gestured to an empty seat beside him. "Lydia, thank you for coming." She sat, acutely aware of every eye on her. "What's happening?" "News from the outside world," Drakonov said. "The resistance has learned of a vulnerability in our defenses. They're planning an attack on this fortress in 3 days' time." Horror washed through her. "How do you know?" "We have our own spies." His voice was carefully neutral, but she heard the accusation beneath. "They also know you're here." They believe you've been captured. The attack is meant to be a rescue mission and an assassination attempt." Lydia felt sick. "I didn't tell them anything. I swear." "I know." His hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. "But they're coming regardless. We need to prepare, and I need to know, where do you stand?" Every vampire in the room watched her, waiting. She could feel their suspicion, their anger. She was human, one of the enemy, and she'd infiltrated their home under false pretenses. They had every right to mistrust her. But Drakonov's hand was warm, no, cool, but comforting in hers, and she knew her answer. "I stand with you," she said clearly. "I'll help however I can." The tension in the room didn't disappear, but it eased. Drakonov's expression softened with relief. "Then we have work to do." The next hours were a flurry of activity. Drakonov explained that the fortress had been designed with defense in mind, built over centuries to withstand attacks. But the resistance had obtained ancient plans, blueprints from before the modern reinforcements. They knew the weak points, the tunnels that led deep into the heart of the structure. "We'll evacuate the non-combatants," Drakonov decided. "Elders, children, anyone who can't fight. Lord Vasilios, coordinate with the Vienna Coven. They've offered sanctuary." "And the humans?" asked a female vampire with scars across her face. "The donors, the servants?" "They go too. I won't risk their lives." Lydia spoke up, surprising herself. "What if I go to them, the resistance? I could tell them the truth, that I wasn't captured, that I've learned." "They'll kill you." Drakonov's voice was flat. "The moment they realize you've turned, you're a traitor. They don't forgive that." "But if there's a chance to stop the attack?" "No." The word was final, almost angry. His crimson eyes burned into hers. "I won't allow you to put yourself in that kind of danger. It's not your choice. It is when you're under my protection." They stared at each other, the air crackling with tension. Finally, Lydia looked away. "Fine. Then let me help here. I know their tactics, their strategies. I can tell you how they'll attack." Drakonov nodded slowly. "Very well." For the rest of the day, Lydia worked alongside the Vampire Council, sharing everything she knew about the resistance. Their weapons, specially designed stakes and UV grenades. Their formations always strike teams of 6. Their priorities: kill the leadership first, then mop up the rest. It felt like betrayal, but she reminded herself that the resistance was wrong. They were the aggressors here, attacking people who'd done them no harm. As evening fell and the council dismissed, Drakonov asked her to stay. They were alone in the chamber, and he looked exhausted. Could vampires even get tired? Apparently so. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for choosing to help. I know it wasn't easy." "I chose what's right." She hesitated, then added, "And I chose you." His eyes widened slightly. "Lydia, I know this is crazy. I know I've only been here 2 days. But I see you, Drakonov. I see the man you are, the king you try to be. And I—" She trailed off, unable to finish. He crossed to her in an instant, that impossible vampire speed, and cupped her face in his hands. His touch was gentle, reverent. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear something like that," he murmured. "I've been alone for so long. King, leader, protector, but never just a man, never someone's choice." "You're mine," she whispered, "if you'll have me." His kiss was her answer. His lips met hers with a hunger that stole her breath, cool and soft and perfect. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and he pulled her closer, deepening the kiss. It was everything she'd imagined, and more consuming, passionate, filled with centuries of loneliness and longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard though he didn't need to breathe, he rested his forehead against hers. "I will protect you," he vowed. "No matter what comes, I will keep you safe." "I don't need protection. I need partnership." He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, almost mortal. "Then that's what you'll have." They spent the evening together, talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories from his long life, the wonders he'd seen, the horrors he'd survived. She told him about her childhood, her dreams of becoming a doctor before the world changed, her fear that she'd never be more than a soldier. He listened to all of it, holding her hand, occasionally pressing kisses to her knuckles. "When this is over," he said as the night grew late, "I want to take you somewhere beautiful. Paris, perhaps, or the Scottish Highlands. Anywhere you want to go." "I'd like that." She leaned her head on his shoulder, marveling at how safe she felt. "Though I'm not sure the world will be ready for a human and a vampire together. Then we'll make them ready. Together." The attack came at dawn on the third day. The resistance had timed it perfectly, striking when the sun was rising and the vampires would be at their weakest. Drakonov had prepared for this, of course. The fortress had blackout shutters, thick and impenetrable, that sealed every window. The underground levels were already dark, safe from any light, but that didn't make the assault any less terrifying. Lydia stood in the war room, watching the monitors that showed the outside. Dozens of resistance fighters poured through the forest surrounding the fortress, armed with crossbows and UV lamps. They wore protective gear, Kevlar and helmets, and they moved with military precision. "They'll breach the east tunnel in minutes," reported a vampire guard. "Squad 3 is in position to intercept." Drakonov stood at the center of the room, calm despite the chaos. He'd armed himself with a sword, an ancient blade that looked like it had seen 1,000 battles, and he wore armor, black leather reinforced with metal. He looked every inch the warrior king. "Let them come," he said. "We'll funnel them into the kill zones, non-lethal force where possible. I don't want to give them more martyrs." Lydia felt useless standing there, watching. She'd been given a weapon, a simple dagger, but she wasn't a fighter. Not really. Her skills were infiltration, information gathering. But as the battle began, as the sounds of combat echoed through the corridors, she knew she couldn't just hide. "I'm going out there," she announced. Drakonov's head snapped toward her. "Absolutely not. They'll recognize me. Maybe I can convince some of them to stand down. And maybe they'll shoot you on sight." He crossed to her, gripping her shoulders. "Please, Lydia, stay here where it's safe." "Nowhere is safe right now." She met his eyes, willing him to understand. "Let me try. Let me do something." He looked torn, conflict raging across his features. Finally, he pulled her into a fierce kiss, pouring everything he felt into it. "If you die," he said against her lips, "I will raze their entire organization to the ground." Dramatic, but I appreciate the sentiment. She tried to smile, to ease his worry, but her heart was pounding. "I'll be careful, I promise." He nodded reluctantly and called for 2 vampire guards. "Stay with her. Don't let her out of your sight. If she's in danger, get her back here immediately." The guards, both female and deadly looking, flanked her as she left the war room. The sounds of battle grew louder as they navigated the corridors. Shouts, the clash of metal, the hiss of UV weapons discharging. They emerged into a large atrium where resistance fighters had broken through. Vampires engaged them, moving with blinding speed, disarming and incapacitating without killing. Lydia saw a familiar face in the chaos. Marcus, one of her trainers. He was older, grizzled, a veteran of the resistance. He wielded a crossbow, firing bolts at a young vampire who dodged with ease. "Marcus!" she shouted. "Stop!" He whirled and his eyes widened with recognition. "Lydia, thank God we thought you were captured." "I wasn't. Marcus, listen to me. This is all wrong. The vampires here haven't done anything. They don't want war." His expression hardened. "They got to you. Damn it, I warned Command you weren't ready for deep cover. They didn't brainwash me. I've seen the truth. They're not monsters. They drink blood. They kill." He raised the crossbow, aiming past her at one of her guards. "Get out of the way, Lydia." "No." She stepped directly into his line of fire. "You'll have to shoot me first." "Don't test me, girl. Then don't make me choose between you and what's right." They stared each other down, and Lydia saw the moment his resolve wavered. But before either could speak, an explosion rocked the atrium. The east wall blew inward, and more resistance fighters poured through. Among them was a woman Lydia recognized with a sinking feeling. Commander Helena Price, leader of the Prague cell. Helena was ruthless, brilliant, and utterly convinced of her cause. "Fall back," Helena ordered. "They're funneling us. Regroup and push toward the throne room." Marcus lowered his crossbow, and Lydia felt a flicker of hope. But then Helena's eyes found her, standing between vampires and humans, and her expression turned cold. "Traitor!" Helena hissed. She raised a pistol loaded with wooden bullets, Lydia knew, and fired. The vampire guard to Lydia's left shoved her aside, taking the bullet meant for her. The guard crumpled with a cry of pain, and Lydia scrambled toward her. The other guard moved to intercept Helena, but more resistance fighters blocked her path. "Lydia, run!" the wounded guard gasped. The bullet had lodged near her heart, and black blood vampire blood seeped through her armor. Lydia tried to help her, but hands grabbed her from behind. Marcus. He hauled her to her feet and dragged her toward Helena. "I've got her, Commander." "Good. She'll tell us everything about their defenses." Helena's smile was predatory. "And then she'll die as an example to other would-be traitors." Terror and fury warred in Lydia's chest. She struggled against Marcus's grip, but he was too strong. "You're making a mistake. These vampires have done nothing wrong. They exist. That's wrong enough." Helena turned to her fighters. "Push forward. We end this today." But before they could advance, the lights in the atrium went out. Darkness descended, absolute and terrifying. Lydia heard Helena curse, heard the resistance fighters scrambling for their UV lamps, but the lights didn't come back on. Instead, there was only the sound of movement, impossibly fast, and then screams. When the lights flickered back on moments later, every resistance fighter except Helena and Marcus was unconscious, disarmed, and bound. And standing in the center of the room, sword in hand and fury in his crimson eyes, was Drakonov. "Release her," he said quietly. The words were soft, but they carried such weight, such command, that Marcus's hands fell away from Lydia immediately. She stumbled forward, and Drakonov caught her, pulling her behind him protectively. Helena raised her pistol, aiming at Drakonov's heart. "One shot, that's all it takes. Then take it." He didn't move, didn't even flinch. "But know that if you do, my people will show you no mercy. Every human in this fortress will be spared, but you, I'll make you understand what it means to threaten what's mine. Lydia is human. She's not yours. She is mine by choice, just as I am hers." His hand found Lydia's, squeezing gently. "And I will not let you harm her." Helena's finger tightened on the trigger, and Lydia's breath caught. But Marcus stepped forward, placing a hand on Helena's arm. "Don't. Look around. We've lost. If we kill him, his people will slaughter us all. Is that worth it?" Helena's jaw clenched, rage radiating from her, but slowly she lowered the gun. "This isn't over. It is today." Drakonov's voice was final. "You'll take your wounded and leave. If you ever return, if you ever threaten my people or Lydia again, there will be consequences. Am I understood?" For a long moment, silence reigned. Then Helena nodded curtly. "Understood." Drakonov gestured, and his vampires began releasing the unconscious fighters, carrying them toward the blown-out wall. Marcus helped gather them, avoiding Lydia's gaze. She wanted to say something, to make him understand. But what was there to say? She'd chosen her side, and he'd chosen his. As the resistance retreated, Helena paused at the threshold. She looked back at Lydia, and there was something like pity in her eyes. "He'll drain you eventually. They always do. And when he does, don't say I didn't warn you." Then she was gone, and the fortress fell silent. Drakonov turned to Lydia, his hands framing her face as he checked her for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did they—" "I'm fine." She covered his hands with her own. "But your guard, she took a bullet for me." "Irina will heal. Wooden bullets hurt, but they're not fatal unless they pierce the heart directly." He pulled Lydia into a fierce embrace, and she felt him trembling. "I thought I'd lost you. When I saw them take you, You saved me." She held him tight, breathing in his scent. "You protected me, just like you promised. Always." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Always, my Lydia." They stood like that, wrapped in each other as the fortress slowly returned to order. The wounded were tended to, the damage assessed. Miraculously, no one had died, vampire or human. The resistance had been driven off and the fortress secured. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. Because Lydia knew this wasn't the end. Helena would return eventually, with more fighters, better weapons. The war wasn't over. But for now, in this moment, she was safe. They were safe. And that would have to be enough. That evening, after the chaos had settled and repairs begun, Drakonov took Lydia to the highest tower of the fortress. It was above ground, something she hadn't seen yet, and the view stole her breath. Prague spread out below them, the city glittering like a jewel in the twilight. The sun had set, and stars were beginning to emerge. "I come here sometimes," Drakonov said, standing beside her at the parapet. when the weight of kingship becomes too much. It reminds me what I'm fighting for. All those lives down there, human and vampire, just trying to exist. They deserve peace. Lydia leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Do you think we'll ever have it? Real peace? I have to believe we will, otherwise what's the point? He tilted her chin up, his crimson eyes soft. But even if we don't, even if the world keeps fighting, I have you. That's more than I ever hoped for. She smiled, her heart full. You're such a romantic for an ancient vampire king. Only for you. He kissed her, slow and sweet, and she melted into him. When they parted, he said, Stay with me, Lydia. Not as a guest, not as a spy, but as my partner. Help me build a better world. What exactly are you asking? I'm asking you to rule beside me, to be my queen if you'll have me. Her eyes widened. That's Drakonov. I'm human. I'm mortal. How would that even work? I've thought about that. He took her hands, his expression serious. There are ways to extend human life, not immortality, not vampirism, but centuries instead of decades. You would age, but slowly. We could have time, real time together, but only if you want it. I won't force you into anything. Lydia's mind raced. He was offering her forever, or as close to it as a human could get, a life beside him, building peace between their species. It was everything she'd never known she wanted, but it meant leaving behind her old life completely, becoming something new. What about the resistance? She asked. They'll see me as a traitor. Let them. The vampires who matter will see you as a bridge, and in time, maybe the humans will too. He squeezed her hands. I won't lie to you. It will be hard. There will be those who oppose us, who see our union as weakness or betrayal, but I believe we can weather it. Together. She thought about her brother, about the anger and grief that had driven her to the resistance, but she also thought about the vampires she'd met here, Celestina, Irina, young Alexander. They weren't monsters, they were people, and they deserved to live without fear just as humans did. And Drakonov, he'd shown her a kind of love she'd never imagined. Fierce and protective, yes, but also gentle and patient. He saw her, truly saw her, and loved her anyway. Yes, she said, yes, I'll stay. I'll be your partner, your queen, whatever you need. Joy transformed his face, and he swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, full of promise and passion. I love you, he murmured against her lips, my brave, beautiful Lydia. I will spend eternity proving myself worthy of you. You already are, she whispered back. I love you too. They stood on the tower as night deepened, wrapped in each other, watching the stars emerge. Below them, Prague slept, unaware of the two people who'd just vowed to change the world, but Lydia felt hope blooming in her chest. They'd faced an army and survived. They'd chosen love over hate, unity over division, and together, she believed they could do anything. The following weeks were a whirlwind. News of Lydia's decision spread quickly through both vampire and human communities. Among vampires, reactions were mixed. Many of Drakonov's court accepted her cautiously, won over by her courage during the attack and her genuine desire to help. Others remained suspicious, convinced she was still a spy or that her influence would weaken their king. Lydia faced it all with as much grace as she could muster, learning vampire customs and politics, trying to prove she belonged. The human world was less forgiving. The resistance branded her a traitor, spreading her name and face through every cell. There were threats, promises of execution if she was ever captured. Lydia tried not to think about it, but sometimes, late at night, she wondered if she'd made the right choice. Drakonov always seemed to sense her doubts. He'd pull her close, murmur reassurances, remind her why they were doing this. And slowly, things began to change. It started small. A human donor named Sophia approached Lydia one day, nervous but determined. I heard you're trying to build peace, Sophia said. I want to help. I've fed the vampires here for 5 years, and they've treated me like family. There are more humans like me, people who understand. Maybe we could organize? Show the world that cooperation is possible? Lydia seized on the idea. With Drakonov's support, she established a council half human, half vampire, dedicated to fostering understanding between the species. They held meetings weekly, discussing grievances and solutions, working to create systems where both could coexist safely. It was slow, frustrating work, but gradually progress emerged. A human hospital in Prague agreed to partner with a vampire coven, exchanging blood donations for vampire healers who could work night shifts. The vampires' supernatural senses made them incredible diagnosticians, and human patients began requesting them specifically. Word spread, and other hospitals took notice. A vampire artist collaborated with a human sculptor, creating a memorial for all those lost in the conflict, human and vampire alike. The monument was unveiled in a park in Prague, and hundreds attended. There were protesters, yes, but also supporters, people from both sides who were tired of fighting, who wanted something better. Lydia threw herself into the work, and Drakonov stood beside her every step of the way. He attended every meeting, mediated every dispute, and slowly his vision of peace began to take shape. It wasn't perfect. There were still attacks, still hatred and fear, but it was a beginning. 4 months after the fortress attack, Drakonov and Lydia stood before the combined vampire court and the human council they'd built. It was a historic moment, the first time both groups had gathered peacefully. Lydia wore a gown of deep red, the color of blood, as a statement. She was human, yes, but she was also part of the vampire world now. She belonged to both. Drakonov stood beside her in formal black, his white hair gleaming in the candlelight. He held her hand as he addressed the assembled crowd. "For too long, our peoples have been divided by fear," he began. "Vampires feared human hatred and violence. Humans feared vampire strength and hunger. And that fear has cost us dearly. We've lost friends, family, innocents on both sides. But today, I stand before you with a proposition. What if we chose trust instead of fear? What if we built a future where both our species could thrive?" He gestured to Lydia. "This woman, this brave, brilliant human, has shown me that such a future is possible. She risked everything to understand us, to bridge the divide, and in doing so, she's proven that love is stronger than hate, that courage can overcome prejudice. I am proud to call her my partner, and soon my wife." A murmur ran through the crowd. Lydia's heart pounded. They'd discussed marriage privately, but announcing it publicly was a bold move. She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his presence, and stepped forward. "I know many of you doubt me," she said, her voice carrying through the hall. "You see me as an outsider, a former enemy, and you're not wrong. I came here to spy, to betray. But I stayed because I learned the truth. Vampires are not monsters, and humans are not prey. We're two sides of the same coin, capable of great good and great evil. The question is, which will we choose?" She looked out at the faces watching her, vampires pale and proud, humans wary and hopeful. "I choose to build bridges. I choose to believe that we can be better. And I'm asking you to choose the same. Help us create a world where our children, human and vampire, don't grow up afraid." Silence followed her words. Then, from the back of the hall, someone began to clap. It was Sophia, the human donor. Others joined her, vampires and humans alike, and soon the hall thundered with applause. Not everyone clapped. There were still skeptics, still those who clung to old hatreds, but enough applauded to give Lydia hope. That night, after the gathering dispersed and the fortress quieted, Drakonov led Lydia to his private chambers. She'd been there before, but tonight felt different. There was a weight to the air, a sense of significance. Are you certain about this?" he asked softly. "Marriage, the treatment to extend your life, all of it. Once we begin, there's no going back." "I've never been more certain of anything." She cupped his face, her thumb brushing his pale cheek. "I want forever with you, Drakonov, or as close to it as I can get." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I never thought I'd find someone like you. In 1,000 years, I've met countless people, but none who saw me the way you do. Not as a king, not as a monster, but as a man. You are a man, a good one, and I'm honored to spend my life with you." He kissed her then, and it was different from before. There was a desperation to it, a need that went beyond physical desire. He needed her to know how much she meant to him, how her love had transformed him, and she kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her emotions into the contact. They made love that night, slow and tender and profound. He worshipped every inch of her, his cool hands mapping her warm skin, his lips trailing kisses across her body. She explored him in turn, marveling at the way he responded to her touch, the way his eyes darkened with desire. There was a vulnerability and intimacy, a trust that went beyond words, and they gave themselves to each other completely. Afterward, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her back. "I'll protect you," he murmured into her hair. "From the resistance, from those who oppose us, from anything that threatens you. You have my word." "I know," she pressed a kiss over his heart. "And I'll stand beside you no matter what comes. We're in this together." "Together," he echoed, and the word felt like a vow. The wedding took place 2 months later in the great hall of the fortress, decorated with flowers and candles that cast a warm glow over everything. Vampires and humans attended in equal numbers, a testament to the bridges they'd built. Lydia wore a gown of white silk embroidered with silver thread, and Drakonov wore formal attire that made him look like a prince from a fairy tale. Lord Vasilios, who had warmed to Lydia over the months, officiated. His voice rang out as he spoke of unity and hope, of two people from different worlds choosing to become one. When it came time for vows, Lydia's hands trembled as she held Drakonov's. "I vow to stand beside you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "to fight for our dream of peace, to love you through every challenge. You've given me purpose, hope, and a future I never imagined. I promise to honor that gift for as long as I live." Drakonov's eyes shimmered. Could vampires cry? As he spoke his own vows. "I vow to protect you, to cherish you, to give you a life worthy of your courage. You've taught me that even after 1,000 years, there are still miracles in this world. You are my miracle, Lydia, and I will love you until the stars burn out." They exchanged rings, hers a band of silver set with rubies, his a simple black metal, and when Vasilios pronounced them married, the hall erupted in cheers. Drakonov pulled Lydia into his arms and kissed her deeply, and she felt tears stream down her face, happy tears for the first time in years. The celebration lasted through the night. There was music and dancing, food and blood wine for those who drank it. Lydia danced with Drakonov, with Sophia, with vampires and humans alike. She saw Marcus in the crowd. He'd been invited as a gesture of goodwill, and their eyes met across the hall. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement, and she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Maybe not everyone would accept their union, but some would. And that was enough. As dawn approached and the vampires retreated to light-protected chambers, Drakonov took Lydia to the tower where he'd proposed. The sky was lightening, pink and gold spreading across the horizon. He couldn't stay long, the sun would rise soon, but he wanted this moment with her. "How do you feel?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Like I'm dreaming." She leaned back against him. "A year ago, I was a soldier planning to kill you. Now I'm your wife. It seems impossible." "The best things usually are." He kissed her neck, gentle and reverent. "We have a long road ahead. The treatment to extend your life begins next week, and it won't be easy. There will be pain, adjustments, and the world won't suddenly embrace us. We'll face opposition, danger, maybe even war again." "I know." She turned in his arms, meeting his crimson gaze. "But I'm not afraid. Not with you. Nor I with you." He smiled, and it was radiant. "We'll change the world, Lydia, together." And they did. Over the following years, Lydia and Drakonov became symbols of what was possible when fear gave way to understanding. Their council expanded, encompassing cities across Europe. Laws were passed protecting both vampires and humans, establishing rights and responsibilities for both species. It wasn't without setbacks. There were attacks, assassinations attempted on both their lives, covens and resistance cells that refused to lay down arms. But slowly, painfully, beautifully, peace took root. The treatment to extend Lydia's life worked. It was agonizing at first, her body fighting the alchemical and medical blend that altered her very cells, but Drakonov never left her side. He held her through the pain, whispered reassurances, and when it was over, she emerged changed. Not a vampire, but not entirely human either. Her aging slowed to a crawl. Decades would pass before she showed signs of getting older. She'd have centuries with Drakonov, and the thought filled her with joy. They traveled the world, visiting covens and human communities, spreading their message of unity. Lydia became a skilled diplomat, respected by both sides for her fairness and compassion. Drakonov remained a powerful king, but his reign became known for justice and peace rather than fear. 20 years after their wedding, they stood on a stage in Paris addressing a crowd of thousands. Behind them was a monument, a stone sculpture of a human and vampire holding hands, reaching toward the sky. It had been commissioned to commemorate the official peace treaty signed between the Vampire High Council and the newly formed Human Alliance. 20 years ago, Drakonov said, his voice amplified by speakers, "My wife and I made a choice. We chose to trust instead of fear, to love instead of hate. And look what we've built." He gestured to the crowd, to the humans and vampires mingling freely. "We've created a world where our children, and yes, there are children now, adopted by mixed families, cared for by both species, can grow up without fear. We've proven that coexistence isn't just possible. It's beautiful." Lydia stepped forward, older now, but still vibrant. Silver streaked her dark hair, and laugh lines creased her eyes. "We won't pretend it's been easy," she said. "We've lost people we love. We've faced hatred and violence. But we've also seen incredible courage. Humans and vampires risking everything to protect each other, friendships that transcend species, love that defies logic." She looked at Drakonov, and her eyes shone with emotion. 20 years ago, I walked into a vampire king's chambers as a spy. I left as his partner. And every day since, I've been grateful for that choice. Because love, real, true, unconditional love is the most powerful force in the world. It's what will carry us into the future. The crowd roared its approval, and as Drakonov pulled Lydia into his arms, kissing her before thousands, she felt complete. They'd changed the world, yes, but more importantly, they'd changed each other. He'd taught her that strength could be gentle, that power didn't have to corrupt. She'd taught him that vulnerability was its own kind of courage, that love was worth any risk. That night, in their home, a beautiful estate outside Paris that blended modern and Gothic architecture, they lay together in their bed, Lydia's head on Drakonov's chest as she'd done countless times before. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Taking a human as your queen? I know some vampires still resent me." "Never." His arms tightened around her. "You're the best decision I ever made, and those who resent you are fools. You've given our people a future they never thought possible." "We gave them that. Together." "Together," he agreed. He tilted her chin up, his crimson eyes soft in the moonlight, streaming through the window. "I love you, Lydia Devereaux Ashenmoor. For now, for always, for every century we're granted. And I love you, Drakonov Ashenmoor, my king, my husband, my heart." They kissed, tender and sweet, and outside their window, the world slept peacefully. Human and vampire, coexisting at last. It hadn't been easy, it hadn't been quick, but it had been worth it. 50 years after that night in the sickroom, when Lydia had stood over a supposedly sleeping king with a needle in her hand, they celebrated their golden anniversary. Lydia was in her 70s but looked barely 40, the treatment continuing to preserve her. Drakonov was unchanged, immortal and ageless, and his love for her had only deepened with time. Their anniversary was marked across the world. In Prague, where it all began, a new university opened, the Ashenmoor Institute for Cross-Species Studies. Human and vampire students studied side by side, learning history, medicine, philosophy. It was everything they'd dreamed of. At the celebration, surrounded by friends and family, both human and vampire, Lydia gave a speech. Her voice was strong, clear, full of the wisdom of a life well lived. 50 years ago, I made a choice that changed my life. I chose to see beyond fear, to trust in love, to believe in the impossible. And standing here today, looking at all of you, I see proof that the impossible can become reality." She took Drakonov's hand, squeezing tight. "We've built something beautiful together. Not just a marriage, but a movement, a world where difference is celebrated, not feared, where love transcends species, where peace is possible. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. Thank you. Thank you for believing in us, for fighting alongside us, for proving that humanity, both human and vampire, is capable of extraordinary things. Here's to the next 50 years. The crowd erupted in applause, and as Drakonov swept Lydia into a dance, she felt a contentment she'd never imagined possible. She'd lost so much in her youth, her mother, her brother, her innocence, but she'd gained immeasurably more, a partner who cherished her, a purpose that fulfilled her, a family that spanned species. As they danced beneath the stars, Drakonov leaned down to whisper in her ear. I knew, you know. Knew what? That night you came to my sick room. I knew from the moment you entered the fortress that you were special, that you would change everything. I pretended to sleep because I wanted to see what you would do, yes, but also because I was afraid. She pulled back to look at him, surprised. Afraid of what? That if you knew I was awake, you'd run. And I'd lose the chance to know you. Selfish, perhaps, but I couldn't let you go. His smile was soft, vulnerable. Best decision I ever made. Lydia laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. You're ridiculous, a 1,000-year-old vampire afraid of a human girl. Not afraid of you, afraid of losing you before I'd even met you. He spun her and she laughed again, the sound echoing through the night. I love you, Lydia. For every moment you've given me, for every smile, every tear, every beat of your mortal heart, you are my eternity. And you are mine, she whispered back. They danced until the sun threatened the horizon, and then they retreated inside, hand in hand, hearts entwined. Behind them, the world they'd built continued to thrive, humans and vampires living in harmony, proof that love could conquer even the deepest divides. And in the quiet moments before dawn, as Lydia lay in her husband's arms, she thought back to that night 50 years ago. The night she'd posed as a nurse in the Vampire King's sick room, the night he'd pretended to sleep, the night that changed everything. She'd gone there to kill him. She'd left having found her soulmate, and every day since, she'd been grateful for the courage to choose love over hate, trust over fear, hope over despair, because in the end, that choice had given her everything. A husband who adored her, a purpose that inspired her, a life that mattered. It was more than she'd ever dared to dream, and it was perfect. As dawn broke and Drakonov's eyes grew heavy, the sun pulling him toward sleep, he pressed one last kiss to her forehead. Stay with me, he murmured, already drifting. Always, she promised. And she did. For the rest of her long, extraordinary life, she stayed by his side. They ruled together, loved together, built a better world together. And when, many decades later, Lydia's mortal life finally came to its natural end, she went peacefully, held in the arms of the man she loved, knowing she'd lived a life of purpose and meaning. Drakonov grieved her loss, as he knew he would. But he didn't regret a moment. She'd given him centuries of joy, and her legacy lived on in the world they'd created, a world where vampires and humans coexisted in peace, a world where love conquered all. And sometimes, in the quiet of night, he swore he could still feel her presence, a warmth beside him, a whisper of laughter, a reminder that their love transcended even death. She'd posed as a nurse in his sick room all those years ago. He'd known, but kept pretending to sleep. And from that single moment of curiosity and courage, they'd changed the world forever. Their story became legend, passed down through generations, human and vampire alike. The Vampire King and his human queen, who'd chosen love over war, trust over fear, unity over division. They became symbols of what was possible when people dared to see past difference, when they chose compassion over hate. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Not the treaty, not the laws, not even the peace they'd fought so hard to build. It was the love story that inspired countless others to make the same choice, to be brave, to be kind, to believe in the impossible. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a sword or a stake or a serum. Sometimes it's simply a hand extended in trust, a heart opened in love, a choice to see the person beneath the monster. And that choice, made over and over by humans and vampires across the world, became the foundation of a new era. An era of peace, prosperity, and hope, All because one woman had the courage to choose differently, and one king had the wisdom to let her. Together, they'd rewritten history. And their love story would endure forever, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of partnership, and the transformative magic of true love. The end of their story was just the beginning of a better world, and that world, built on the foundation of their love, would thrive for generations to come.